Two famous paintings are hiding the same secret, and that secret has been sitting in plain sight for over a century. One was painted by a man too poor to afford a model, so he used a mirror. The other was painted from the grounds of an asylum 2 years later, after he had tried to destroy himself. They both hang in the same great museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and they are both painted by Vincent Van Gogh. Millions of people walk past both of them every year, but almost no one really understands what connects them. Look at his eyes in the self-portrait. One is green, the other looks blue, as if two different people are trapped inside the same face. Now look at the brushstrokes around his head. They radiate outward in every direction, like an explosion, or like a halo disintegrating. Details matter. Now look at the clouds in the wheat field. The shapes seem almost alive, almost like faces. Are they speaking to us? And here's something most people never learn. The self-portrait was painted on the back of a completely different painting. Flip the canvas over and you'll find a much darker image hiding behind it. These details aren't accidents, they're clues, and they lead to one of the most tortured inner lives in the history of art. A man rejected in love with the words no, never, never. A man who wandered red light districts at night looking for warmth. A man who wrote, "There's a great fire in my soul, but no one ever comes to warm themselves at it." That fire is encoded in both of these paintings. Every brushstroke is a confession. And in this video, I'm going to decode them and reveal the devastating secret that connects these two masterpieces to each other and to all of us. Because once you see what these two paintings are really hiding, once you understand the patterns in the strokes, you'll never look at Van Gogh the same way again. Let's start with the self-portrait. Van Gogh painted more than 20 self-portraits during his 2 years in Paris, for one devastatingly simple reason: he couldn't afford to pay a model. He wrote to his brother Theo, "I purposely bought a good enough mirror to work from myself for want of a model." So Van Gogh became his own best subject, not out of vanity, but out of poverty. This particular portrait, painted in 1887, is called Self-Portrait with a Straw Hat. It's small, barely 16 inches tall, but it commands the room. Van Gogh wears a yellow straw hat, the kind worn by peasant laborers, and it's enormous. It fills nearly the entire width of the painting, dominating the composition. This isn't a fashion choice, it's more of a declaration. Van Gogh identified deeply with working people, farmers, weavers, and field hands. He even dressed like them, and he wanted to be one of them. The hat tells you what he valued: simplicity, honest labor, the kind of life that had no room for the pretensions of the Parisian art world. But now look at his face. The tight mouth and the furrowed brow, the deep shadows beneath his eyes, the one blue and the one greenish, that seem to both plead for contact and push you away at the same time. His cheeks are gaunt, and his expression is that of a man running on almost nothing. Then look at that signature brushwork. This is where the painting becomes extraordinary. The background is made up of short, rapid dashes of color, blues, greens, oranges, applied in a divisionist technique influenced by Seurat and the Pointillists. But Van Gogh doesn't use dots, he uses dashes. And those dashes radiate outward from his head in every direction, like energy escaping from his skull, as if the thoughts inside of him can't be contained by the boundaries of his body. These self-portraits weren't just exercises in figure painting, they were laboratories, each one an experiment in how to make a human face pulse with emotional force. To understand what's happening in these brushstrokes, you need to understand the man behind them, and the story is almost unbearable. Vincent van Gogh was born in 1853 in the Netherlands. He failed at nearly everything he'd tried before painting: as an art dealer, a teacher, a bookseller, and a preacher. He wrote to his brother Theo, "What am I in the eyes of most people? A non-entity, an eccentric, or an unpleasant person." He was desperately, achingly lonely. He fell violently in love with his cousin, Key Voss Stricker, and proposed marriage. She rejected him with 3 words that he could never forget. No, never, never. He refused to accept it. He showed up at her parents' house trying to change her mind. She refused to see him, and this haunted him for years. Later, in The Hague, he began living with a pregnant sex worker named Clasina, known as Sienne. He tried to build a family with her and her child. He wanted a home, warmth, and domestic life. But the relationship scandalized his family and eventually collapsed. He wrote, "I feel a certain emptiness without a woman." But every attempt at love ended in disaster or disgrace. He wandered red light districts at night, not always for sex, sometimes simply for the company of other human beings on the margins. He described these visits as driven by loneliness, by curiosity about human life, by compassion for people society had discarded. It was the same impulse that made him paint peasants and laborers instead of aristocrats and gods. And through all of it, he depended financially on his brother Theo. Almost his entire adult life he depended on him, and this caused enormous guilt. He feared people saw him as, in his own words, a failure, a burden. That anxiety drove him to work obsessively, painting sometimes 2 or 3 canvases a day, as if the sheer volume of his output might justify his existence. Paul Gauguin, who lived with Van Gogh in Arles for 2 volatile months, later described him as a volcano on the point of eruption. Now let us walk through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, from the self-portrait to the second painting. Very close by, one of the magnificent landscapes that Van Gogh created. Wheat Field with Cypresses was painted in the summer of 1889 at the Asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in France. Van Gogh had voluntarily committed himself after his breakdown in Arles, the one that ended with the severed ear. He was allowed to paint when he was well enough to leave the grounds, and on a blazing hot day in late June, he carried his canvas out into the Provençal countryside and painted this directly from nature. This painting is alive. There's simply no other word for it. A golden wheat field surges across the lower half of the canvas, the stalks bending and twisting under an invisible wind. The brushstrokes are short, diagonal, almost frantic. You can feel the heat and the motion in every mark. Van Gogh described the wheat as representing the extreme heat and applied the paint in thick impasto, the kind that catches real light on the surface of the canvas. Above the field, the sky churns. Massive white clouds curl and spiral against a deep blue that Van Gogh himself compared to a piece of Scotch plaid. The clouds are not passive. They seem to be in a conversation, rolling, pressing, almost whispering. Art scholars have noticed that the forms in the sky suggest animal shapes, maybe fantastical creatures, as if the heavens themselves are alive with thought. And then, on the right side of the canvas, the cypresses. 2 dark towers of deep green. The only piercing verticals in the entire composition. They rise from the earth and push into the sky like dark flames. Van Gogh compared their shape to Egyptian obelisks and called them a splash of black in a sunny landscape. But they're far more than that. The cypresses are the lonely sentinels of this painting. They stand close to the rest of nature, the bushes, the wheat, sometimes the olive trees, but they don't quite touch it. They coexist with the landscape but seem to inhabit a different plane. Art historians have long read cypress trees in Van Gogh's works as symbols of death and mourning, markers of the boundary between the living and the departed. Some art historians see this composition as sort of a dance between masculine and feminine, and I find that a very fascinating interpretation as well. It does seem like some of the bushes on the lower part seem to lean towards those tall, erect cypresses, as if drawn to them. The entire painting is a dialogue between these forces. The horizontal surge of the earth, the vertical solitude of the trees, and the spiraling chaos of the sky, those thoughts pressing down on it. Van Gogh considered this one of his best summer landscapes. He made 3 painted versions and a reed pen drawing. He sent one of them to Theo. He gave a smaller replica to his mother and sister. He painted from inside an asylum, and it's one of the most beautiful things a human being has ever created. Now, before we go on, I'd like to remind you that if you'd like to have either of these 2 magnificent Van Gogh paintings in your own home, you can purchase them directly through my website. The link is below in the description. The shipping is completely free worldwide. And if you're a true art lover, keep exploring the catalog. You'll find all kinds of great masterpieces from around the world that I've hand-selected and that I guarantee the quality of these prints. You can also see many more of the paintings that show up in my videos. If you make a purchase from the website, it greatly contributes to me being able to make these well-researched, non-AI videos for you every week. Thank you. Now let's continue. So here's where everything gets even more truly fascinating. Let's go back to the self-portrait with the straw hat and look at the brushstrokes around Van Gogh's head. They radiate outward, those short, urgent dashes of color spinning away from the face in every direction. It's like his skull cannot contain what's inside of it. And now look again back at the sky in the wheat field with cypresses. Those clouds that spiral and churn in that same rhythmic, radiating pattern. It's the same energy, the same emotional force, the same internal storm, but translated from a human face over to a landscape. These really aren't 2 totally different paintings. They're 2 views of the same inner life. The self-portrait shows us the man. The wheat field shows us what it felt like to be that man. Throughout art history, some of the greatest painters have been torn between 2 powerful forces, a longing for spiritual meaning and the pull of raw human desire. Michelangelo certainly struggled with it, writing that earthly beauty leads the soul astray. Caravaggio lived it violently, painting sacred scenes by day while brawling in taverns at night. And Gauguin, the friend of Van Gogh, chased it across the ocean, writing, "I shut my eyes in order to see." And in the letters of Vincent Van Gogh, we see that same conflict unfolding, line by line. He wrote one of the most revealing sentences, in fact, in all of art history. "I have a terrible need of, shall I say the word, religion. Then I go out at night to paint the stars." That single line explains both paintings and many of his other works. The self-painting is the man searching. The wheat field is what he found, not in the church, but in the landscape. Nature became his cathedral. The swirling sky was his stained glass, and the cypress trees were his silent congregation. He also wrote, "There's a great fire in my soul, but no one ever comes to warm themselves at it." That loneliness, that sense of burning with something enormous that the world refuses to see, is encoded in every brushstroke of both paintings. So Van Gogh knew what he was doing. He also knew the paintings probably wouldn't sell in his lifetime. He wrote to Theo, "I can't change the fact that my paintings don't sell, but the time will come when people will recognize that they are worth more than the price of the paint." And he also wrote something that still haunts anyone who reads it. "The sadness will last forever." Van Gogh died on July 29, 1890, at the age of 37. He had sold very few paintings in his lifetime. His brother Theo died 6 months later. Today, these two paintings hang only a room apart at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, seen by millions of people every year. The self-portrait was painted on the back of an earlier peasant study, literally on recycled canvas, because Van Gogh could not afford a new one. The wheat field was painted from the grounds of an asylum by a man who had recently tried to destroy himself. And yet, standing in front of either one, you feel something that no amount of biography can fully explain. It's an energy and a presence, as if the man is still somehow in the room with you, pressing his emotions through the paint into your chest. A quote has been attributed to him: "I put my heart and my soul into my work and have lost my mind in the process." Now, it's not clear if that really was Van Gogh or if it's just our imagination of what he might have said. The source can't be found. But walking away from one painting and looking at the other, looking at the brushstrokes around his head, comparing it to the sky above the wheat field, you see those same patterns, the same force, the same thing that some would call madness and others would call fire and passion. It's the fire that no one came to warn themselves at, and that now warms millions of people. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Have you seen either of these two paintings at the Met? And if you did, which one speaks to you more? The one looking at you, or the landscape he painted when he was staying in the asylum? If you'd like to collect either of these paintings, you can find them both in my catalog, along with other great Van Gogh works: Starry Night, Irises, Sunflowers. Shipping's free worldwide, and every purchase directly helps me. Thank you for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the very next video where we continue to explore the great masterpieces of the world.